The Witch and the Definitely Dead Detective by Sadie Brent. Chapter 22. Whispers Beneath the Willows. The morning air was crisp, tinged with the faint scent of fallen leaves and earth as Evie approached Old Stony Cemetery. It had rained lightly the night before, leaving the iron gate slightly slick as she pushed it open with a rusty groan. Spinks trotted by her side, his leash jingling softly. The cemetery stretched out before her like a patchwork quilt of time. Moss-covered gravestones leaned at odd angles, their inscriptions faded by years of weathering. Towering willow trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches sweeping the air as though offering quiet benedictions to the resting souls below. Beyond the graveyard's edge, the river's low murmur added a soft, melancholic undercurrent. Evie clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked from her garden, sunflowers and asters tied together with twine, and glanced down at the simple map Marcellus had sketched for her on the back of a diner receipt. Plot 236. That number again. Her pulse quickened as she walked toward the designated section of the cemetery. What would she find? Evie stopped abruptly as her eyes landed on a headstone beneath a gnarled willow. The grave was simple and unassuming, the polished granite gleaming faintly in the muted sunlight. Lisbeth Janet Hutchison, beloved friend, writer and witch, 1952-2024. The inscription caught her off guard. Seeing witch etched into the stone made it all feel so official. It was a title Lizzie had worn proudly in life, and one Evie was still trying to grow into. She kneeled down and placed the bouquet at the base of the headstone. That was when she noticed the other flowers, a fresh arrangement of wildflowers tied with a ribbon, tucked delicately into which was a sprig of dried yarrow. Her fingers hesitated over the yarrow. Her herbal knowledge echoed in her mind, symbols of protection, healing, and warning. A knot tightened in her chest. Was someone trying to protect Lizzie's spirit? Or was the yarrow meant for her? The soft crunch of gravel behind her made her jump. She turned to see Marcellus walking toward her, his tall frame silhouetted against the gray sky. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said with a sheepish grin, holding up a single white lily. "I come here sometimes when I need to think." "Morning, Marcellus," Evie said, rising to her feet. "You visit Lizzie often?" He nodded, his expression shifting into something quieter, more introspective. "She was one of a kind, wasn't she? I guess I just like to check in on her. Feels right." Evie watched as he kneeled to place the lily beside the other flowers. "You said this was plot 236, she asked, trying to keep her voice even. "That's right," he replied. "Lizzie specifically requested to be buried here, next to the willow trees. Peaceful, isn't it?" Her throat tightened and she nodded mutely. Plot 236. The Crypto Arcanum's cryptic message came rushing back. 236 Mors Immatura. Untimely death. Marcellus rose and dusted off his hands, oblivious to her turmoil. "You okay, Evie? You look a little pale." "I'm fine," she said quickly. "It's just a lot to take in, I guess." He gave her a kind smile. "Lizzie would be proud of you, you know. She always talked about family, how much she wanted someone to carry on with her legacy. You're doing a good thing." "Thanks," Evie murmured, her mind racing. Later that evening, Evie locked up the shop after returning the Crypto Arcanum to its hidden drawer in the roll-top desk. She lingered for a moment in the darkened space, her fingers brushing the edges of the desk as though it might somehow offer her answers. "Good night, Lizzie." "Good night, James," she whispered softly, before flicking off the lights and heading for the door. The streets of Stony Fork were unusually quiet for a Sunday evening, the festive bustle of the reopening weekend now just a memory. Evie stepped outside and locked the door behind her, the chill of the night air biting at her cheeks. As she turned to walk toward her car, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Across the street, partially illuminated by a flickering street lamp, stood a figure. Tall and motionless, their face obscured by shadows. Evie's breath caught in her throat. The figure didn't move, didn't step forward or back. They simply stood there, watching. Her heart hammered in her chest. She squinted, trying to make out details. Was it a man or a woman? Was it someone she knew? But the dim lighting offered no clues. "Hello," she called hesitantly, her voice trembling. The figure shifted slightly, and in the blink of an eye, they melted into the shadows, disappearing down a side alley. Evie stood frozen for a moment, her pulse racing. She told herself it was nothing, a trick of the light, maybe a nosy local heading home, but her instincts whispered otherwise. By the time Evie reached the safety of her riverside house, the sense of being watched still clung to her like a second skin. She double-checked all the locks and even peeked through the curtains, half expecting to see the shadowy figure standing at the edge of her garden. But the street outside was empty, the moonlight casting long, silent shadows. Spinks meowed softly and rubbed against her legs, his warm presence grounding her. She scooped him up and carried him to the bedroom, her gaze lingering on the greenhouse visible from her window. She knew she needed to investigate it. The dream had haunted her every night since she'd arrived, urging her to search, to uncover whatever truth the greenhouse held. But tonight, the darkness felt too thick, too heavy. She couldn't bring herself to step outside again. "Tomorrow," she whispered, setting Spinks on the bed and pulling the covers around her. As she drifted off to sleep, the images of Lizzie's grave, the yarrow sprig, and the shadowy figure played over and over in her mind.